The massive clone army was rolling out its forces. Millions of soldiers, armor, and equipment would need to be transported from different planets. Clone production had been increased to add to the army, but in order to maintain a steady number to replenish fallen soldiers, more cloning facilities would need to be built. It was a migration on a massive scale, and it would take time for the clones to come to the Wookiees' aid. The Wookiees on Kashyyyk were advised to seek shelter, as the clones could not arrive in time to protect them from the Imperial invasion. As the clones previously only had experience fighting droids, the protocols and studies needed to be altered. Clones in training were required to follow a bunch of theory classes learning about tactics, political relations, history, and alien species. Physical training was first presented in a 4-team battle royale where the clones tried to capture a central point. The blasters they used would only stun the clones when hit, but several would show signs of fear when confronted with combat for the first time. But it was also common in this first round that some of the clones show great promise. The clones that passed the first test would continue to the next training phase, which consisted of a 2 versus 2 team match. They would fight for a central point again, and communication and tactics were essential as the clones were now wearing armor and the training field was bigger. A particular clone by the name of Goro showed great potential during the first training phase and received leadership over Blue Team. He decided to wait as his troops moved onward, as he would keep tight communication with the clone next in rank. He thought this would be wise, as he could make important decisions on the fly without a chance of being taken out, leaving his team without somebody to lead. All of the other teams moved together with their team leaders, who soon came under fire. It was Team Yellow and Orange against Red and Blue. Goro ordered his troops to fully concentrate on Orange's forces, while his teammates' group divided fire between Orange and Yellow. Team Orange was dug in, but fell to the power of both enemy teams firing on them simultaneously. Yellow Team tried a desperate flanking maneuver as they were not able to go anywhere due to Team Red firing on their position. Goro punished Yellow hard for this, as a huge part of their team were wiped out. Goro now came to the aid of his troops as well to boost morale and assess the situation firsthand. Yellow Group's team leader was taken out, and all who were left were regular troops. The leader of the Red Team got too overconfident and pushed forward. He was rewarded with being shot. Goro proceeded to the capture point as he made sure his troops were covering each other well. He set up a perimeter around the CP and rained down fire on the opposing team. Then there was the final stage in the training, where the clones would face a series of battle situations against training droids. Goro had now a larger group under his command, including officers and squad leaders. The training droids they were about to face were calibrated to be the hardest challenge yet. Before the test would start, Goro and his officers had come up with a plan that was executed when the operation went underway. It was the classic capture the fortress or hill type of scenario, but the droids had a far better position and could rain down hell upon the clone trainees. The little cover that was there was put to good use, but could not save everybody. Since this scenario simulated an approach that was disadvantageous for the clones, it was vital that when units would move, that constant covering fire would be provided. Clones would either need to flank left or right, and Goro made the call for the left flank to push forward, while the others provided constant barrages towards the flankers. But the left flanking units got hit hard, and one of the officers panicked, resulting in part of his squad being wiped. But this unfortunate event presented an opportunity for the right flank to quickly move up as the rear line moved forward too. The overall clone line had moved up quite a bit and had solid cover. There were still one or two who fell to the training droids, but the clones were able to return massive damage while still being able to move up further.
Many of the training droids had been destroyed, and though some might see an opportunity to push, Godo wanted to make sure that most of the enemies up in their defensive position had been cleared out before setting up more men. Everyone now moved forward, many not even worried about cover, and Godo walked among his troops, providing covering fire for his men. The enemy fortress seemed ripe for the taking. Only a handful of enemy units were left, and Godo ordered units to ascend the stairs, both left and right, to capture this territory. Godo succeeded in passing the test and giving orders to large groups in distress. Godo passed and was rewarded a company of his own. Godo's company was one of many on the first ships who headed to aid the Wookiees. On Kashyyyk, several Wookiees had volunteered to stay and fight the Imperials to gain more time for the others to seek shelter. But they were small in number and all of them knew they had no chance of winning. They all accepted their fate to protect their families. From the water, the Imperial units approached. Silhouettes could be seen through the fog. The stormtroopers who headed in first got devastated, but the Imperials returned a favor when their walkers opened fire. Thick black smoke from the explosions blurred the Wookiees' vision. To make matters worse, the Empire had several troops attack from the rear as well. The Wookiees' primitive weaponry was no match for that of the Empire. The ATSTs drew in closer as many Wookiees perished. The Imperials who attacked from the rear had reached the center as well, and unleashed hell on the remaining Wookiees. The soil of Kashyyyk was drenched in Wookiee blood. Though some of the tribes did manage to evacuate and hide thanks to these Wookiees' sacrifice, there were others who were not so lucky, as they were hunted down by Imperial forces. Kashyyyk was now officially under Imperial control. The Republic's forces had finally reached Kashyyyk and preparations for the invasion were made, but their presence did not go unnoticed. Back on Coruscant, a secret meeting was about to take place. Kane, who had joined the rebels and was accompanied by C-3PO and R2-D2, met up with the Coruscant Council to discuss a delicate matter. Kane required a highly trained team of clones to carry out a mission that would stay off the record. In return, the Republic would be allowed to build a cloning facility at a rebel-held planet. The Council agreed, and knew just the right clones who would be perfect for the job. The members of Delta Squad were briefed on a secret mission where they needed to extract a certain document by the name of WM-163. The documents would be handed over to the rebels upon extraction, and in case the commandos would be caught, no one would accuse the rebel faction. They would be deployed on an Imperial Star Destroyer during the battle above Kashyyyk. The battle would be led by Commander Cody, who gave green light for the fleet to advance on the enemy. Several Imperial Star Destroyers, freighters, and dreadnoughts had gathered to await the Republic's advance. The Republic fired first as the Imperials were still maneuvering to attack position. The Republic unleashed its fighters to take out those of the enemy and hit any bearing weak points on the enemy's larger ships. Both fleets were hit hard by blaster fire and missiles.
The fighters were small and nimble, making them difficult to hit by the turrets. As the distance between the two opposing fleets grew smaller, the damage dealt became greater. The Empire lost its first Star Destroyer, as its shields gave way to the Republic's firepower. Amongst the chaos, several fighters engaged with each other in brutal dogfights. The Imperial TIE defenders managed to keep a lot of the Republic's fighters at bay. The Republic was relentless, as they shot everything they got towards the Imperial forces. But the Empire answered with blood, as several of the Republic ships were destroyed during the approach. Amongst the titanious ships, the small fighters still played their part. Another one of the Imperial Star Destroyers had endured so much devastation that it was shredded to bits. The Republic fleet had reached the Empires, and fighting would now occur parallel of each other. At this distance, and with the cover of chaos, it was easy for the Republic to bring the commandos of Delta Squad on one of the Star Destroyers in the lines at the rear. Because most Imperial troops were ordered to their battle stations to fend off the Republic fleet, most of the hallways were abandoned. A perfect opportunity for Delta Squad to extract a package under the Imperial's noses. As the members Boss, Fixer, Scorch and Sev left the cover of the Imperial cargo bay, they caught a glimpse of two stormtroopers in the next hallway. They were instructed to proceed with stealth, but the two stormtroopers were blocking the path. Boss considered using violence, but by a stroke of luck the stormtroopers were requested elsewhere, and the commandos could proceed unseen. The room along the hallway had a few engineers and officers in them, but the clones managed to run past them as well as they were occupied. They had to dodge an incoming group of stormtroopers headed towards their battle stations. All members managed to mostly remain unseen, and when one did get caught, a swift strike was all it took to silence the enemy. Boss, Scorch and Fixer had found the intel room, but a large group of stormtroopers was patrolling the hall in front of it. By chance, Sev had spotted several Wookiee prisoners held by the Empire, and he radioed in that releasing them would create a distraction to avert the enemy's eyes from the intel room. Boss agreed with the plan, and it was easy for Fixer to overturn the prison controls and release the Wookiees. Once released, they immediately ran for their weapons as they took out the guards. Shortly after, stormtroopers entered the area and a fight broke out. The first stormtroopers who entered got killed easily, but more and more joined the fight and managed to force the Wookiees into a different room. The distraction worked, and Sev awaited the others at the entrance of the intel room. Security was at a minimum, and Delta quickly took care of the ones remaining. Fixer quickly got seated behind the terminal and started copying the file. The rest of Delta Squad stood guard outside as it would take a while. In the other hall, some of the Wookiees took parts of the Imperial armor as protection. They managed to take out many stormtroopers, but their numbers seemed infinite. In the end, the Wookiees were defeated by the overwhelming force.
Fixer saw one of the terminal's incoming stormtroopers and warned the others to set up defensive position. The commandos tried to keep the approaching stormtroopers at bay. Seb was hit and needed to briefly retreat to heal at a backup tank. Fixer was almost done retrieving the files when he saw on a different terminal that an ATST accompanied by stormtroopers was heading their way from the rear. Alongside their approaching route, Fixer saw 2 Imperial turrets. It would not take much for him to reroute the turret's protocols to fire on Imperial troops. The powerful blast by the turrets launched the ATST in the air, crushing several stormtroopers when it got back down. The stormtroopers were getting closer, but Boss, Sev, and Scorch still managed to hold them off. Fixer had finally got the necessary documents, and Boss ordered the team to retreat. Fixer started an override at the destroyer's core, eventually leading to self-destruction. As the 4 members of Delta ran to the escape pods, the ship started to tear apart, blasting its crew to pieces. Delta managed to extract in the nick of time, as the destroyer erupted in a ball of fire. The fighting between the 2 fleets still raged on, as the opposite sides closed the distance. Republic Venator destroyers and Acclamator assault ships surrounded the Imperial fleet, as they unleashed utter hell. Though the Imperials had lost most of its ships, the deadly dreadnoughts managed to deal out incredible damage from this close distance. One single dreadnought managed to destroy multiple Republic ships. The Republic threw everything it got at the dreadnought, but sustained heavy losses as ship after ship got blown to bits. The Republic fleet maneuvered under the dreadnought to bombard it from all sides, and though the dreadnought managed to take a whole lot of punishment, it finally got obliterated by the Republic. All that was left was a single Star Destroyer that had no chance against the Republic's forces. Silence finally returned. The Republic decided to use the planet Trandosha as their base of operations to send troops to nearby Kashyyyk. The Trandoshans would allow the Republic military access in return for credits. The Republic knew that part of the credits would eventually end up in the hands of the Hutt cartel or even Imperials, but that was a sacrifice they were willing to take. On Kashyyyk, an aerial attack seemed no option as the Imperials set up anti-air defenses. The first wave of clone troopers were deployed on Kashyyyk via Trandosha as an all-out amphibious assault was about to occur. Infantry would hit the Imperial beaches with boats and amphibious walkers, while being supported by a vast array of assault walkers in armor. But the Imperials were waiting for the troops to arrive as they were dug in behind barricades and turrets with deadly walkers on the lines at the rear. For the first time in history, clones and stormtroopers were about to clash. The beaches of Kashyyyk were silent. Lines of artillery, armor, and turrets were awaiting the invading clone troopers. Rarely do stories tell of the horror that common soldiers go through on the battlefield. To many clone troopers,
This beach would be their grave. The spirits of the clone troopers were high as they approached the beach in their landing vehicles. When they came into range of the Imperial artillery, the clones quickly found themselves under fire. Luckily, their landing boats were small and the artillery not very accurate. Nevertheless, some unlucky clones perished before even setting foot on the beach. And thus, it began. It was an absolute nightmare. The helpless clones did not have any proper cover to withstand all the firepower that the Empire threw at them. The infantry desperately hid behind barricades and wreckage as they were mostly dependent on their walkers to take out the Imperial troops. The clones did manage to chip away at the Imperial forces, but for every stormtrooper they killed, they lost 30 clone troopers. The shore was covered in wreckage, bodies, and smoke. Many of the clones were not prepared to perform under such pressure. The higher-ranking clones did their best to push the troops up towards the beach. The clones were easy targets for the Imperial turrets and artillery. And even several heavy armored walkers were lost as they got shelled relentlessly by the Empire. The morale of the clones fell as they tried to take cover behind blown up vehicles as the world around them burned. As the clones lost another walker, they continued to move forward inch by inch as their pile of bodies grew larger. Some of the walkers had reached the beach and the front line was shifting slowly. As the clones drew closer, they were able to return fire more effectively. Several Imperials got blown to bits by the invading force. As the slow-walking transports arrived at the beach as well, several got hit by artillery and left a sea of burning bodies behind. The clone armor was successful in taking out several of the Imperial artillery. The clones pushed hard to take the beach. The Imperial defense was still a force to be reckoned with, and many clone troopers got pinned down. Burning wrecks covered the beach in smoke as the crew burned alive in a daze of panic. More and more clone troopers headed onto the beach as well as their walkers. The Imperials were now suffering heavy losses. They were still able to fight back, but an opening presented itself on the left flank. The clones managed to head far onto the beach there, but got stopped by an Imperial walker. But the clones had their own walker who came to their aid and secured the left flank of the beach. The clones threw out red smoke to signal everyone that they had captured the left side and that victory was near. Most of the Imperial artillery and turrets had been destroyed. Overall, it was fairly safe as the walkers took care of any remaining force. Silence slowly returned as the beach was turned into a graveyard. Its sand soaked in the blood of clones. Its beauty destroyed by artillery barrages. Behind a tree line at the end of the beach lay a tunnel that connected a path leading deeper into the forests of Kashyyyk. General Qui-Gon Jinn and Commander Cody ordered an assault on the tunnel, but requested it to be done by the second wave of clone troopers as they still had the strength and eagerness to fight. The soldiers awaited the order to proceed into the forest, but the Imperials had set up a trap as they realized that strength in numbers meant nothing as all of the enemy troops had to go through the same tunnel. The tunnel would act as a choke point, and if the clones did manage to break through, then 3 AT-STs were awaiting their arrival. The Imperial turrets opened fire as the clones headed into the bushes. They got hit hard by Imperial blaster fire as the thick foliage made it difficult to see and anticipate where it was coming from. The Imperial turrets even managed to reach the tree line and take out clones who were still at the shore. The clones who did manage to reach the tunnel's entrance got shot to pieces. A new nightmare started to unfold. The clones had massive numbers waiting at the tunnel, but none were able to get through the enemy's defenses. The clones ordered their walkers to go through the forest as well, but the trees slowed them down. Though some of the Imperial infantry fell, the turrets seemed unstoppable as each clone who showed any sign of bravery got put down. The situation seemed absolutely hopeless. One of the walkers finally had arrived to fire from a proper angle, and with a powerful blast, the enemy turrets were silenced. The clones could finally head in, and had little trouble getting rid of the stormtroopers. But just as the Imperials had anticipated, they were put to another halt when fired upon by the fierce AT-STs. Blaster fire and rockets took quick care of the troopers as they tried to break through. Every attempt the clones made to advance got turned around as even their anti-armor troopers did not get a chance to fire a shot. The tunnel quickly filled with mountains of dead clone troopers. A handful of rocket troopers managed to reach a hill through the forest leading behind the AT-STs. When they got into position, they fired their rockets and took down the frightening walkers. Finally, the clones could break through and set up a perimeter. Before the clones' ships could land to reinforce and extract the wounded, they would need to take care of the Imperial AA guns set around the beach area. They would send in Phase 2 clones to do this. The clone army had achieved its first victory, but it came at a terrible price, and many would tell the tale of the horrors that occurred on that beach. Nearby the beach invaded by the clones stood 2 AA turrets which prevented the Republican ships from landing. Several Phase 2 clone squads hid in the vegetation supported by light walkers. The main issue was that the turrets could only be reached via the front entrance, which was guarded well. The clones commenced the attack and approached from 2 sides. They hoped to divert the enemy fire in one direction so that the other squad could advance. But the Imperials managed to keep the pressure on both sides, and many clones were pinned down. Deadly snipers were a great threat to the right flanking clones, who did not have much cover to protect them. The Republican walkers kept concentrating fire on the entrance to ease the approach. Every now and then the clones managed to take out a stormtrooper, but the favor was often soon returned. The clones on the right flank tried to reach the tree line to disappear in the forest and be secure from sniper fire. All of a sudden, the Imperial walker that stood its ground started moving out of the base and took the clone infantry and walkers directly under fire. Clones who were still out in the open stood no chance, but it created an opening for some light Republican walkers on the left side to move in. The Imperial's front defense was weakened, but the ATPT still proved dangerous, so the clones called in their own walker support. As the Republican ATXT showed itself, it concentrated all fire on the ATPT. With a deafening blow, the Imperial unit was destroyed. The clones continued their approach on the Imperial site as they lost some of their light walkers. As the remains of the ATPT sank to the bottom of the lake, the ATXT proceeded to the front of the entrance. Its heavy, menacing stomps frightened the stormtroopers who found themselves locked in. The downside of only one entrance was that there was no way to escape. As the ATXT cleared most of the Imperial base, the clones gathered at the wall and entered as well. Firefights were brief as the clones took care easily of the remaining stormtroopers. When the base was clear, the clone engineers armed the AA turrets with explosives to blow them up. With these two out of the way, only one AA turret remained to be taken out. On the other side of the galaxy, plans were made by the Separatists to put the false flag attack in motion. In order for this to succeed, equipment and armor of the Imperial faction would be necessary. Grievous made a deal with the Hutt cartel where they would be provided with scavenged Imperial equipment and armor for a certain price. Amongst the members of the Hutt cartel was a young man by the name of Case Tyleria. Tyleria grew up on the streets of Mos Eisley and worked his way up from a petty street thief to commanding his own personal pirate group in the Hutt cartel. The assignment to salvage Imperial equipment sounded like a golden opportunity to make easy money and rise in rank even more. During a patrol, the sensors picked up an Imperial distress signal from a broken down ship awaiting rescue. This would prove an easy target for the pirates. The hull of the Imperial ship was quite damaged, but much of the equipment and vehicles seemed salvageable. But there was no sign of the crew. Tyleria figured they must have used the escape pods to evacuate. Just to be sure, they would take a look around to find more salvageable equipment or remaining personnel. What they did not know at the time was that they were being watched by careful eyes that were not Imperial. The pirates split up in several groups to cover more floors and rooms, unaware of the danger that lurked. The pirates stumbled upon several more vehicles that were worth salvaging. Two of the pirates found a broken door, of which a terrifying sound emerged. They were so horrified by what they saw that they never noticed the guns drawn behind their backs. With a few shots, their lives ended, without the other pirates hearing a thing. Talaria and his group arrived at a supply room where they learned the whereabouts of the Imperial crew. They all lay dead, piled up in the corner. Talaria was confused. Then loud exchanges of blaster fire sounded through the hallways of the ship. Mandalorian soldiers appeared from their hiding spots as they surprised the unsuspecting pirates. Talaria and his group hurried back, but the door they came from was shut tight and sabotaged. These Mandalorians took the Imperial ship after their previous victory and set up the distress beacon as a trap to lure other Imperial forces to them. It just happened that Talaria's crew arrived there first. Everything went according to the Mandalorians' plan. The pirates were separated, pinned down, and easily overwhelmed. When Talaria and his group arrived, it was already too late as the Mandalorians had them surrounded. The Mandalorian in charge who set up the trap was known as Borkala. He was notorious for being cruel and ruthless, with a natural-born gift for bloodshed. He ordered Talaria and his remaining pirates to surrender, and they complied. But the cruelty of Borkala knew no bounds, as he thought that the pirates would be an excellent snack for his pet rancor he had hid inside the ship. It brought Borkala much joy as he forced Talaria to watch his crew being eaten alive, before eventually succumbing to the deadly jaws of the rancor himself. One final anti-air position remained near the clones' landing area. It was further inland, and the clones had less backup as logistics were slowed at the beachhead. Nevertheless, the clones had good faith in securing another victory. But the Imperials had already sent reinforcements to the position. Storm commandos, snipers, and more were laying in wait. When the first troopers were spotted, the Imperials unleashed a constant barrage of blaster fire, destroying everything in its wake. By rotating firing squads, they made sure the clones had no room to breathe. Desperately, the clone troopers dove for cover, but many died before ever realizing what was happening. The vicious turrets were relentless as its shots sent clones flying all over the place as their armor got pierced. The ATSTs took care of the clones' small vehicles, which could not maneuver well with all the vegetation and dead bodies. Some clones got a lucky hit here and there, but the Imperial's rage did not diminish. A flanking vehicle was spotted and destroyed. The clones were hiding, pinned down, and many were wounded. The Empire's troops were convinced they would hold long enough to be reinforced again to take back lost territory. There was nothing the clones could do. A second attack might be necessary with heavier backup, but that would give the Imperials time to recover as well. Then all of a sudden, one of the ATSTs blew up. The war cry of the Wookiees could be heard as they appeared from the tunnels behind the Imperials. The heavy weaponry of theirs quickly took out the majority of the Imperial defenders. Confused, the stormtroopers returned fire, but it was already too late. The second ATST together with the AA gun were destroyed by the Wookiee launchers. The Imperial trench turned into a death trap as the troopers inside were being attacked from both sides. With the most heavy units out of the way, the clones felt confident enough to approach and secure victory. The Wookiee resistance fighters offered an alliance and shared their intel on the area. On Geonosis at that time, the false flag attack was about to commence. Droids in stormtrooper armor and captured Imperial walkers would advance shortly. As the CIS was not well known with Imperial hierarchy, the army of troops was a mess of different units which outfits they managed to secure. From the Intel HQ, Grievous and other members of the Council oversaw the attack as they gave the signal to start. As the units approached, they were spotted from afar by the Geonosians, who rapidly got to their combat stations. Once in range, they opened fire. But the sad truth was that their weapons were too inferior and inaccurate to do any damage. Two salvaged armored transports also fired at the Geonosians from the rear. The front units were taken out in seconds. The Geonosians were not equipped to deal with the walkers, and once one of the ATSTs started firing, they quickly destroyed their turrets and infantry. The droids disguised as troopers stayed back to prevent being shot and some of their exoskeletons being exposed. Barely any got destroyed. Once the official retreat was given, Grievous rolled out his armor to clear the battlefield. The aggressiveness of the droids controlling the walkers was lowered to ensure they got destroyed with the least amount of effort. The transports were still firing, but with a few shots they were taken out as well. Any remaining walkers were set to self-detonate to rid any evidence of the droids. A state of emergency was established, and the attack area became prohibited to inhabitants. The Council would now plan its next move to set up the Imperials as the aggressor and get their treaty signed for boosting the war economy. But during the night, something unexpected occurred. From the armored transports, groups of Imperial troopers emerged. A few weeks earlier, a group of pirates ordered by the Hutt cartel to salvage Imperial wrecks in the name of the Separatists were caught by Grand Admiral Thrawn. Through torture, the Admiral uncovered the Separatist plans. It was easy figuring out where the false flag attack would take place. Thrawn was known for his excellent strategy, mostly ridiculed as mere tricks by opposing forces. The unexpected attack presented an opportunity for his brilliance as the last pirate was torched after spilling all his information. Thrawn proposed to secretly hide troopers amongst the fake ones to deal a serious blow to the Separatists when they least expected. Lord Vader agreed and offered his most elite troopers for Thrawn's operation. What the Separatists might have forgotten is that pirates choose the side of the highest bidder and are easily persuaded. With their help, the armored transports holding the troopers were put into position. The Imperial's target was the Intel HQ, where two members of the Council were discussing their strategy. With the area being off limits to civilians, the Imperials had no problem reaching the highly positioned entrance. Then, with a swift maneuver, the troopers opened fire on the security forces. It was a short, frantic fight, but both Separatist Council members lost their lives. Imperial units continued to destroy the hardware as their evacuation was called in. Once the troopers had rigged the intel chamber with explosives, they left the area. With a blinding flash, the main intel HQ of the Separatists was turned to rubble. Before the first response units arrived, the Imperials had already left Geonosis. The next morning, Grievous looked at what they've done. The false flag attack turned into an actual attack. This was a warning from the Imperials to give them a taste and how easily they would be fooled and played if entering the war as well. As expected by the Separatist Council, the false flag attack fueled a huge commodity as citizens were screaming for war. The politicians promised a new economic focus, boosting and expanding the development of new war technology. Their plan had mostly worked, as the majority believed the entire assault was done by the Empire. Only a few naysayers tried to stir up the hornet's nest by claiming it was their own government responsible for the bloodbath. Of these people, a man by the name of Til Quay started to gain quite a following as he broadcasted messages across the galaxy, demanding justice for what happened. In fear of riots and a reenactment of what happened on Coruscant, the council decided Til Quay needed to be eliminated before he rose to too much power. Dooku and Grievous entrusted this task with Jango, who was a veteran bounty hunter. He was ordered to hunt Til Quay down and silence him for good. Til Quay's location was unknown as the broadcasting signal was always scattered. In order to find a trail, Jango would need to visit Coruscant. With the declaration of war, pawns on the chessboard were being moved. The Empire sent an invasion fleet to Naboo to make their first strike on the Separatists. Consequently, the Emperor himself ordered Grand Admiral Thrawn to head to Kashyyyk to oversee the battle against the clones. Thrawn had a daring and controversial plan, which the Emperor approved. At the same time, the Republic also made their move, as Master Yoda requested Plo Koon to oversee their Kashyyyk assault, and simultaneously plans were being made for their next invasion against the Empire. A faction that was quiet and lay low for a while started becoming more active over the last several days. The rebels started attacking small Imperial outposts, sometimes with light armor at their side. The battles were small in scale, frantic, often coming to an abrupt end. The attacks seemed sporadic, random even to the unwatchful eye. Sometimes with deadly consequences. But in reality, the rebels were searching for something. Something that had to do with document WM-163, which they received from the clones. Jango had reached Coruscant and headed to the Star Bar, which was located in one of the sleazy parts of the city. It functioned as both a bar, strip club, and escort service. He talked to Madame Shryana, as her working girls were a huge source of information. Jango had used this tactic in the past, and offered Shryana and her girls many credits in exchange for information. As the girls worked outside as well to lure customers, they often heard what was the latest gossip in town. Jango asked if some of the girls knew something about Til Quay, and one of the courtesans indeed had a regular customer who sometimes rambled on about the broadcastings that occurred. She had an appointment with him later this week, and Jango requested to be informed when he arrived. On the day the customer showed up, he was paired with his regular girl and brought to the room in the back. Jango was awaiting his arrival. It did not take much to make him squeal, as the Mandalorian armor was enough to make him spill the information. It turned out he was part of the Til Quay's following, sent to Coruscant to spread the word around and get people talking about the false flag conspiracy. He gave Jango the address where the broadcast was being recorded. It was an old warehouse not too far from there. Jango headed towards it, not knowing he was being watched. When he entered the warehouse, Til Quay was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it became quickly clear to Jango he had been lured into a trap, as several bandits were awaiting his arrival. The bandit leader taunted Jango, who kept his composure. He asked if any one of the bandits knew something about Til Quay. Their answer was negative, as their only purpose was to kill those who came asking questions. And with that, suddenly weapons were drawn, as Jango had pinned down everyone's position and fired with high accuracy. With a flaming grenade, he managed to divert one of the bandits and take him out. Then the leader afterward. Jango then finally took his time to kill the frightened last remaining bandit. Behind Jango's mask, frustration and anger could be felt as he was deceived by the customer. It did not take much effort to track him down to his apartment. Jango confronted the man, who was visibly shocked as he expected Jango to be taken out by the bandits. He tried to bargain with Jango, promising to now tell the truth if he let him go. But Jango did not want to hear any of it. By searching his files, he located the signal source of the broadcastings, discovering it came from Tatooine. Jango was on his way again. During this time on Naboo, a secret rescue mission was underway by the rebels. News of the Imperial's plan to attack Naboo had reached the rebels' higher-ups, and it was decided to rescue and evacuate Queen Amidala, who had been captured by the Separatists, before the Imperials would arrive. The rebel units arrived in Theed by boat and continued on foot, having to deal with small skirmishes along the way. Amongst the rebel units was also Princess Leia, who personally wanted to come along to ensure her mother's safety. Once Leia and her soldiers had reached the cell blocks, it did not take much time to free the Queen and some of the royal guards. The Queen was very grateful to her daughter and the troops. They would then evacuate her off the planet with the intention of supporting and fueling the Naboo resistance with off-planet broadcasting. By dusk, the troops had reached their ships to escape Naboo. Jango had landed on Tatooine and headed to the town nearest of the signal location to ask around. With some credits to persuade some loose lips, Jango managed to pinpoint the exact whereabouts of Til Quay. It was a small collection of buildings at the edge of the village. When Jango arrived, Til Quay and his guards were already waiting for him. Jango announced he came for Til Quay's head and his head alone, but would kill anyone who would stand in his way. Jango noticed something unsettling. Most of Til Quay's guards were common thugs, the kind one hires from Jabba the Hutt. But amongst them there was a defiler, a special agent working for a faction few knew the existence of, as they often lurked in the shadows. Til Quay seemed not to worry. He mentioned there was also a bounty on Jango's head, personally established by Quay himself after being informed by the customer back on Coruscant. Til Quay had hired a bounty hunter of his own, in case Jango would show up. From behind one of the buildings, Boba Fett revealed himself as Jango's mask hid the surprise and disbelief on his face. The same could be said for Boba, who took the job of taking out a nameless bounty hunter, not knowing it would turn out to be his own father. Unsure of the situation, guns were drawn, and Til Quay awaited in silence for his bounty hunter to strike first, not realizing the genetic bond the two hunters in front of him shared. Boba looked at his father, and then back at his contractors, and with a quick nod, the two turned around and opened fire. Surprise and confusion took hold over Til Quay's guards as they got attacked by both at once.
We've got droids.
Grenades and accurate shots took care of most guards in mere moments, including the defiler. Father and son stood shoulder to shoulder as they rid themselves from everyone except Til Quay himself. They actually let him go to prevent the trail of the faction that the fighters belonged to turn cold. They would both inform their masters of the new discovery, as it might initiate a new strategy. Til Quay had traveled far to visit the secret hideout of the Zan Consortium, led by Tiber Zan. Zan's faction was a direct rival of the Hutt cartel. Zan came up with the idea for the broadcast, as the war of the Separatists would mean a loss on black market weapon sales. They would now be manufactured internally. What started out as a campaign to save market share turned out to be a golden opportunity to take out both Jango and Boba Fett, two of the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunters. Til Quay asked Zan to send his best defilers to deal with it, but Zan knew two of his own who would be better for the job, letting the hunters become the hunted. With the Imperial anti-air guns out of the way near the beachhead, the clones performed constant airstrikes and bombardments. Thrawn had most units in the vicinity be moved to a more central location, for his counterplan would need several steps in order to work. A migration of hundreds of troopers was happening all over Kashyyyk. Ever since the Empire took hold of Kashyyyk, Chewbacca, who was part of the rebels, requested to be transferred to fight to take back his home planet. His request was finally answered, as he and a small group of rebels would be left in charge of Cody, who was still in command while waiting for Plo Koon to arrive.
On Kashyyyk, Chewbacca learned that not too far from the landing area, the Imperials had a small outpost where they held Wookiee prisoners. The fog that morning could be used as cover when attacking the outpost. But Cody could not afford a large-scale assault as they were preparing for a march land inward. Cody decided that Gree would lead a small group of clones accompanied by some armor. Several members of the Wookiee resistance would join them as well. According to the sources, the camp and beachhead were not well defended, with the Wookiee turrets seeming the biggest threat. While Thrawn was preparing and focused on the center, he left the defense of the outer lines to a promising Imperial pilot and officer by the name of Juno Eclipse. Juno would use the pilots under her personal wing to hold the line as long as Thrawn needed to succeed. Back above Naboo, the Separatist fleet was finally introduced to the brutal strength of the Imperial fleet. The CIS ships were setting up defensive positions, but they could never follow the rapid pace in which other factions developed their fleet and ship technology. A single Star Destroyer was used as bait to lure the Separatists out of the defensive line of the planet and into the deadly range of more destroyers. The Star Destroyers were few, the CIS many. All kinds of ships came to the aid to prevent the Empire from invading. Small fighters were swarming around like flies, hoping to do some damage. The shields of the Star Destroyer were strong, and their weapons even stronger. It did not take long before the first Separatist ship fell. Silently hovering in one place, the Imperial ships continued their barrage on the defenders. The main ship was surrounded by smaller ones, and everyone focused fire on the same Star Destroyer. But even that was not enough to break through the shields, and ships crumbled left and right. Some fled in an act of desperation, while others still stayed and fought even though it seemed hopeless. More destroyers had arrived, and to this much firepower, even the Separatist main ship was no match. Its shields gave way as parts of the ship got destroyed, eventually leading up to the devastating destruction of the ship itself. The Imperial ships headed in closer to secure and proclaim their dominance over Naboo space. On Kashyyyk, Chewbacca's and Gree's assault had started. With cover from the armored vehicles, both clones and rebels headed up the small beach as the defending stormtroopers were soon overwhelmed. Chewbacca led his men to the left flank as Gree and the majority of the clones focused on the opposite side.
I have to take cover. Get the shot here. Get the shot.
Imperial artillery that was positioned high and out of sight slowed the advance as it bombarded both the vehicles and units on the beach. The clones and rebels took several casualties. Craters from the shellings were in turn used as cover as they managed to take out more Imperial troops and man turrets.
I'm taking too much fire.
After killing 2 more turret crews, only 1 remained besides the artillery unit. They focused all fire on the turret, and for a while the front shield could hold, but eventually was destroyed, together with its gunmen. After that, the only obstacle was the artillery, but that gunner got killed as well when the clone armor came into range. Chewbacca and Gree could proceed onward to the outpost. This area was, same as the beach, not heavily defended. The clones only had 1 vehicle left that was operational, but managed to get through the gate with a small number of casualties.
The single Wookiee turret was destroyed by a bomb planted by one of the clones.
Check your weapons. We've got incoming.
The soldiers headed over the hill, running for cover as they were fired upon by the Imperial's inner defense. The stormtroopers at the edge were wiped out as the clones spread through the camp. One of the remaining Wookiees was killed by the heavy weapons of the Imperial units. They lacked proper cover, but hoped constant firing could have them hold out long enough. It did not. Even though quite a few troops were lost due to the stormtroopers, the clones and rebels fired back just as hard and constant, eventually breaking the spirits and bodies of the ones remaining.
Next one! Suppressing fire!
As the armor rolled in as well, there was no denying that the Imperials stood no chance.
I go first, never runs.
They scattered in an attempt to flee, only to be shot down in the progress.
Got clankers.
Things seemed clear and the remaining infantry and armor went into the camp to look for the prisoners. But then something happened that the clones and rebels did not foresee. From the fog, a large group of TIE fighters appeared, followed by 2 TIE Punishers, each piloted by one of Juno's personnel.
Enemy attacking target. We've got droids.
The fighters killed a handful of troops, but as the clones' backs were turned to fire at the ships heading over, the 2 advanced bombers delivered the killing blow. The armor was destroyed, and they suffered heavy losses. From the center appeared a group of Imperial elite units rushing in to capture any remaining rebels and clones. 2 ATSTs were also approaching from the side. Gree managed to escape with a few clones before the Imperials arrived. The rest, including Chewbacca, were captured. The plan to free the Kashyyyk prisoners ironically ended up in Chewbacca himself becoming a prisoner. Because Chewbacca was being considered a high-value target, he was transported and detained at a heavy facility deeper into the jungle. When Gree got back at HQ, Plo Koon had arrived and had already taken command. Gree informed him of their defeat and the capture of Chewbacca. He was being detained at a prison facility deeper into Kashyyyk. It was one of the most heavily defended Imperial positions. A sturdy gate blocked the entrance, overlooked by 3 deadly turbo laser towers, making it impossible to bombard the prison. The Empire also had 3 AT-KT stationed there, which were heavier equipped than the regular AT-ST. Plo Koon thought it was of the utmost importance to free Chewbacca and the captured rebels, to raise morale and strengthen the bond with their rebel allies. As the facility was so heavily defended, a large-scale assault was necessary. The clones would consist of the larger part of the infantry, combined with an AT-TE. Volunteered rebels would make up the rest of the infantry, as well that they provided 3 T-4B heavy tanks for the assault. When the assault force was assembled, they rolled out to free their captured comrades. As the Imperials expected a retrieval mission, they had set up the AT-KTs at the gates, turning them basically into extra turrets. When word reached the Empire of the incoming assault group, they gave green light for the turbo lasers to be activated. They loomed high above the facility, ready to rain down hell on the attacker. One of the T-4B tanks was used as a battering ram when fire was first exchanged. They also provided cover for the infantry, who were easy targets in the open. Though the turbo lasers were very powerful, they were also big targets, making it possible to destroy one of them by focusing all fire on it. But the remaining turbo lasers were relentless to the rebel tanks and took 2 out quickly after one another. The broken down tank was again used as cover, as it created a perimeter to where the infantry could not advance. They had managed to take out a significant amount of Imperial troops, but the AT-KTs and towers made the task impossible. The ATTE was slow, though it managed to give good cover. It took a huge beating as the Imperial artillery and armor threw everything at it. The infantry were ordered to blow a hole in the wall if the armor failed to do so, but the pile of bodies kept getting bigger.
Check your weapons. We've got incoming. Geonosis all over again.
Eventually, the walker took such critical damage that it got destroyed as well. With only one T-4B tank remaining, it was indeed hopeless. The clones at the front tank tried to fall back, but were pinned down. A final desperate attack by some infantry heading through the forest was brought to a halt.
We've got company, General.
The towers continued punishing the clones who stood no chance.
To take cover.
The final tank was destroyed as well, and the sign was given for the Imperial Death Troopers to emerge and clear the rest of the enemy. The black armored elite troops completely overwhelmed the clones and rebels who issued a full retreat. Many were killed as they ran away in fear. The Mandalorians who were at that time preparing for the next invasion had something more cheerful to attend to. It was the annual Mandalorian Blood Games where several Mandalorians from all over the galaxy would brawl to the death for entertainment. As it was a time of war, the games were held on one of the Mandalorian cruisers as huge crowds had gathered to watch the spectacle. Mandalore from different clans came as well to represent their house or sponsored warrior. Others just came to see the blood or wager in a bet. The audience could see all sorts of matches, like tag team battles. The winners of the Mandalorian games were often praised in glory and rewarded with fast ships, heavy weapons, and sometimes even slaves. And those that lost their lives. There were large-scale team matches where often family warrior clans would showcase their dominance, usually resulting in triumph for one family and disaster for the other. Then there were free-for-all fights, where the audience cheered for their favorite warrior as all of them stepped into the arena, but only one would emerge victorious. But the most popular event by far was the Rancor fight, where a group of Mandalorians would need to slay a single Rancor. The Mandalorians chosen for this event were often convicted of breaking the warrior code or fleeing from combat. As the Rancor was often the last remaining, many considered it a death sentence. After the bloodlust of the audience had been satisfied, it was time to focus once again on the war at hand. Turmoil was brewing on Naboo as the resistance fighters found themselves between two opposing factions. Queen Amidala sent out instructions to lay low for now until the situation had calmed. With the Imperials and Separatists focusing on each other, it would take their eyes off the Naboo fighters. Droids and armor were awaiting the Imperials, who had started their deployment of walkers. Amidala requested the resistance to seek shelter, regroup, and prepare weapons and gear, for their enemy would be whoever ruled supreme after the battle had been fought. When Princess Leia was informed on the failed rescue attempt on Chewbacca, she ordered another assault on the prison facility. Instead of only using brute force, this time a small party would secretly infiltrate the prison as well and free Chewbacca and the rebels. Someone with experience in the field of infiltration would be necessary. Thus, Leia requested one of her best for this task, a young rebel by the name of Jyn Erso.
On Kashyyyk, a particular clone engineer was stationed with the nickname Rox. He was praised for his brilliance, but infamous for his orthodox methods of fixing and reprogramming fallen Separatist droids after battles had been won. He gave each of them names and modified them to all look different. The good thing about them being droids
was that as long as the head was still intact, most parts could be replaced when damaged during battle. But many clones thought it was weird and shunned Rox. Because of that, Rox led a lonely life, often not being drafted for battle, as clones did not want to stand beside him or hear his argument for the so manyth time to use his droids in combat. But recently, intel acquired by the rebels turned into a mission for him. Words of Thrawn's counterplan had reached the clones and rebels, but specifics were missing. A very small and not heavily defended mobile Imperial security checkpoint was located, and they figured Rox and his droids would be enough to seize the intel on Thrawn's plan. The checkpoint was on the top of a hill in the forest. Rox booted up all the droids that were combat ready, and embarked on the mission to attack the checkpoint. It did not take long before their presence was noted, and a brief firefight occurred on the road towards the Imperial point. The Imperial troops were a bit surprised themselves, as they saw the droids associated with the Separatists open fire on them. A few droids were lost during the fighting of the slope, but the small alcove as an entrance provided an easy target for the others to concentrate on. The present officers and engineers also took up firearms, but they lacked the combat skill to prove any real resistance. Some even fled further up the hill, but they had no other way to go, and thus were easily sniped from the lower position. With the crew out of the way, Rox started to retrieve the file requested by his superiors. The designated file mentioned that Thrawn was in the process of moving heavy artillery and walkers to a single location further inland for a massive scale counterattack. A few hours later, the second assault on the Imperial prison was about to commence. After the first failed attempt, the Imperials had expanded their defenses to the beach with turrets, barricades, armor, and plenty of infantry. This time, the forces needed in order to attack the prison would need to be much larger, but Plo Koon thought such a large force was a waste if it was only used to free the captives. He ordered Doom to raise his legions and capture the prison for Republic use. Just like the battle before, several rebels would accompany the assault, as the addition of more armor and walkers. But in reality, this frontal assault was a diversion for Jyn Erso and her squad. A nearby cave looks partially out over the side of the prison, and if they used the cave to enter the prison unnoticed, they could free Chewbacca and the others while the Imperial eyes were focused on the beachhead. The Imperial sensors had picked up the attackers' approach. As expected, all personnel were heading to the prison's frontal defenses, giving Jyn and the rebels a chance to scale down the cliff, gaining entry to the prison. At the beach, the clones and rebels came into sight as the towers started firing. The infantry waded through the water to get to the shore quickly, but the Imperial troopers awaited them with ferocious blaster and turret fire. The more agile walkers headed in to support as well, while the enemy armor stood its ground on the sandy beach. With the battle being fought in the background, Jyn found an opportunity to move mostly unseen. Sounds of alarms and distant explosions muffled their footsteps as they headed into the courtyard. The team split up as Jyn and the main assault force prepared to destroy the doors leading further into the prison. The other teams were preparing for the detonation of the main power, thereby forcing the front gate to open. Back at the beach, an absolute slaughter was happening. Both sides gave it everything they had. As the walkers came closer, their attacks on the infantry became more devastating. The front line was weakened, but more armor arrived to reinforce the troops. Explosions echoed through the prison's courtyard as the rebels brought the Imperial power down. The main gate opened, ridding itself as a barrier for the invader. The entrance to the inner halls gave way too, as the rebels started to appear through the thick smoke, completely surprising the few stormtroopers who were still inside the facility. Time was of the essence now, as their presence was no longer unnoticed. On the beach, the Imperial second line started to fall as well. Clone and Rebel units still had trouble reaching the shore, but Rebel tanks and walkers were in range to do some serious damage to the Imperial armor. Beyond this, a line of death troopers stood between the clones and the prison, their accurate blast fire being deadly for infantry, but mostly harmless to the tanks. The beach had mostly been cleared, covered in smoke, fire, and broken parts of metal. The time was there to seize it, but the towers still offered resistance. Jin's unit worked its way deeper into the prison. Casualties were low, as well as resistance, as grenades and blasters rid the hallways of Imperial life. Smoldering corpses covered the sand as the first of the clones had reached the shore and dove for cover. The very first ones fell to the death troopers' fire, but as more and more arrived, they were able to take them out one by one. The clones had claimed the beach and could march straight ahead into the enemy prison. Jin had cleared most of the hallways with her soldiers and had pinpointed Chewbacca's whereabouts. Part of the team went to look for the other prisoners, while Jin and her best units moved to free the Wookiee. In front of the chamber where he was being held stood 3 elite units, but Jin figured some tougher resistance could be present, and so she ordered a full-on relentless attack to break through with grenades. Though 4 men were lost, they managed to get through. It only took the rebel engineer a few moments to clear the shield door and free the captives. Jin ordered all troops to leave the facility at once if they had found the other prisoners, in fear of reinforcements. But once outside, they were welcomed by the victorious clones and rebels who stood upon the doorstep of the prison. At this time, everyone in Theed was holding their breath. With access to the planet being cut off, leadership was left in the hands of Narkoba, a low-ranking counselor with very little training. Though what he lacks in training, he did not lack in spirit, and was prepared to face the enemy head-on. If it was a fight they wanted, it was a fight he would give them.